My husband doesn't love me, and he loves our child even less. On the day the son was born, he didn't even take a look and just threw him into my arms. Later, his first love returned to the country. The usually indifferent man got drunk for the first time at home, laughing as he held our child in his arms. The son joyfully hugged the man's neck and whispered to me, "Mom, what's wrong with the uncle?" I crouched down and held him in my arms, my eyes red as I explained, "Uncle's loved one has come back, so we shouldn't disturb him anymore. We have to move away." After taking my son back to the room to sleep, I returned to the guest room, opened the computer, and began drafting the divorce agreement. This year marks the 7th year of my marriage with Max, and also the 7th year of our separation. Now, I finally plan to let him go. I opened the door, and my 7-year-old son came to me holding a model airplane. "Mom, are we really going to move?" He looked at me, his eyes full of reluctance. "But Uncle hugged me at night, does that mean he is starting to like me?" I was taken aback for a moment, feeling a bit dazed. After 7 years of marriage, Max had never allowed our son to call him Dad. When he was 2 years old, he went to the supermarket with his son and ran into an acquaintance on the way. Because his son accidentally called out Daddy, he put his son, who had just learned to walk, down on the ground and let him walk home. By the time we got home, my son had already fallen countless times, with his knees and palms all scraped up. When he was 4 years old, his son begged for a long time before Max finally agreed to take him to the amusement park. Because of a careless dad from his son, Max let go of his hand. He allowed a 4-year-old child to get lost in the crowd. When they finally found him, the son was hiding in a bush, crying almost to the point of suffocation. From that day on, the son learned to call him Uncle, and our family became a complete joke. Thinking of this, my nose tinged with bitterness, and I couldn't help but pull my son into my arms. "Daniel, the person Uncle likes is coming back, we can't stay in this house any longer." The son's eyes dimmed, and then he hurriedly brought the airplane model in front of me. "But Mom, Uncle gave me a gift tonight." "If he doesn't like me, why would he give me a gift?" His expression was so eager, desperately wanting to prove that he was the child favored by his father. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't say a single word. How should I put it? I want to tell him that Max is happy because his first love is coming back. Or should I tell him that this gift actually benefited from another aunt's influence? I can't say anything at all. I can only silently swallow the bitterness and sorrow in my mouth, just like before, using a polished truth to protect my child. She kissed her son's forehead and wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes where he couldn't see. This is a mother, maintaining an illusion that must be preserved even in the depths of her pain. Suppressing the urge to sob, I smiled and said, "Daniel, if Mom wants to take you away from Uncle, would you be willing?" The son's body stiffened for a moment, then he said softly, "Can't we not go?" I haven't, in a proper way, called him Dad yet. Tears could no longer be held back. I bit my lip tightly. "Daniel, Uncle, he doesn't like us staying in his house. Mom will take you away, okay?" The son retracted his hand, tightly hugging the airplane model to his chest. After a long silence, he said, "I want to give Uncle 3 more chances. If he really doesn't like us, then we'll leave him forever." I closed my eyes and agreed to my son's request. "Okay. Max, I will give you 3 more chances with my son. After those 3 chances, there will never be a place for you in this family again." Today is Friday, and it is also the day Max's first love returns to the country. They were college sweethearts and got engaged after graduation. Little did she know that a month before the wedding, Sally fell head over heels for a French man. Without a second thought, she left Max and went to France to pursue true love. From then on, the two went their separate ways. Max was depressed for quite a while because of her. It was at that time that I became his assistant. One drunken night, we had a child. I also became his underground wife, along with my child, not being favored by him. I printed out the divorce agreement that I had drafted yesterday, and I began preparing my resignation letter. Unlike my son, I am used to Max's coldness and will no longer foolishly wait for a prodigal son to return. 7 years is enough to dispel all my youthful fantasies. Julia, are you really planning to resign? A colleague glanced at my screen and asked me quietly. I smiled and took out the words I had been thinking of. Well, the child's father is abroad, and I plan to take the child with me to reunite as a family. The colleague nodded. That's fine, it must be really tough for you to raise a child alone in the country. Do you know? We all secretly think you are a single mother. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh, but it was a bitter laugh. I am not a single mother, yet I am worse off than one. My eyes began to sting, and I quickly put on a practiced smile, not daring to let anyone notice. After submitting his resignation letter, Max walked in with Sally. The woman walked ahead, a gentle smile on her face. Max followed behind her, his gaze unwilling to leave her for even a moment. A colleague nudged me and whispered, Julia, did you see that? Our Max has finally bloomed like an iron tree. I forced a smile, while a heavy rain fell in my heart. It takes at least a decade for an iron tree to bloom. Max, even if I wait a lifetime, I still won't get him to look at me. In that fleeting moment as we brushed past each other, I couldn't help but call out to him, Max. Just as I was getting started, the man shot me a cold glance. Julia, is there something you need? The words of estrangement carry an implicit warning, warning me to swallow the words in my mouth. Warning me to be mindful of my identity. I lowered my eyes, using my last bit of strength to block the reddening corners. I'm sorry, Max. Max hummed an acknowledgement and immediately withdrew his gaze. He continued to focus intently on Sally, as if she were his entire world. He is my husband, the father of my child. Yet at this moment, he openly displays his love for another woman in front of me. It's quite ironic and also sobering. Thinking of this, I chuckled to myself in self-mockery. Originally, I intended to tell him that I was resigning. Now it seems there's no need to say it. Anyway, he never cared. He didn't care about my emotions, didn't care about our child. Even less did he care about this marriage that had long since become a mere formality. Back at my workstation, I received a call from my son on his children's watch. Mom, there's a parent-teacher meeting tonight, and school ends early today. Uncle Chen brought me to find you. I was momentarily stunned and instinctively got up to walk outside. Just then, I saw Max reaching out to fix Sally's hair. Not far away stood the son with a backpack. The small figure stood at the elevator entrance, staring blankly at his father having an intimate interaction with a strange aunt. Such tenderness, such patience. Both my son and I have witnessed it. I was just about to take him away when Max also noticed his son. The man's body stiffened, and he instinctively withdrew his hand. But the next moment, he slowly yet firmly shielded the woman as they passed by his son, as if he did not know him at all. With a pang in my heart, I quickly took my son back to my workstation. Without waiting for my explanation, my son's eyes turned red, and he asked me, Mom, is that the person Uncle likes? In that moment, I lost all my strength to speak and could only nod with tears in my eyes. The son didn't ask again and quietly took out his homework to write. But the tears still couldn't help but soak the paper. I hold my son, he is my entire world. Max, you have 2 chances left before my son and I leave. After packing up, my son and I were ready to go home. On the way, my son asked me, Mom, can we let Uncle come to the parent-teacher meeting tonight? For 7 years of marriage, Max has never attended his son's parent-teacher meetings. Seeing his expectant gaze, I couldn't bear to refuse and sent a message to Max, our son has a parent-teacher meeting tonight. Are you free? The message was sent out, and like before, it sank without a trace. My son lowered his head, clutching his backpack, and asked me, he doesn't want to come, does he? Then, he smiled understandingly and said nonchalantly, it's okay, Uncle is busy, I can understand. Hearing my son's understanding words, it felt as if a heavy stone was pressing down on my chest. The pain made it almost impossible for me to breathe. Just as I was about to speak, my phone rang. It was a message from Max, I'm free, I'll come. The moment of surprise surged in my heart, and I could hardly wait to show the message interface to my son. "Daniel, did you see? Dad said he would come." The son was taken aback for a moment, then immediately broke into a happy smile. After 7 years of marriage, this was the first time Max was willing to attend his son's parent-teacher meeting. Receiving a positive response from Max, my son was excited all the way. He chattered away about how many times the teacher praised him this semester and how many awards he had received. He also said that he was elected class monitor for this semester, and the teacher promised him that she would announce it at tonight's parent meeting. At this, my son asked me, "Mom, if Dad knows that I've been doing so well at school, he'll like me more, right?" I was taken aback for a moment, and then I felt even more heartache, silently praying that Max wouldn't stand me up. Before leaving, I hope my son can have his wish, even if it's just our self-deception. The clock on the wall chimed again and again, and the time for the parent-teacher meeting was drawing closer. Max still had not shown up. Sally's Facebook has been updated. In the photo, a man is sitting next to a strange little boy, teaching him how to build with Lego hand in hand. Caption: Future good dad. I turned my head and looked towards the living room. My 7-year-old son was quietly sitting on the sofa playing with his toys. Same Lego, same age, same need for companionship. But he has never had a dad like Max by his side. Feeling my gaze, my son seemed to understand something and cautiously asked me, "Mom, is Dad busy again?" I stared blankly into my son's eyes, not daring to tell him. His dad isn't busy, he's with other little friends? I couldn't say anything, just like many times before. I held my son tightly in my arms, heartbroken, and told him, "It's okay, you still have your mom. Mom will always be with you." The son understood and did not ask again, but his eyes couldn't help but turn red. On the way to school, we tacitly agreed not to mention Max again. It was as if he had never agreed to anything, and this home had always been just the two of us. "Max, you have one chance left." I parked the car and took my son into the school. But the moment I stepped into the classroom, I froze in place. "Max? Dad?" Max sat by the window, instinctively looking over at us upon hearing the words, his pupils constricting. "What are you doing here?" The unexpected words made me pause, and a bad premonition rose in my heart. My son has been in elementary school for half a year, yet Max doesn't even know the name of his class. The son didn't hear clearly and joyfully ran to the man. "Dad, you." Max frowned. "What did you call me?" The expression on the son's face stiffened for a moment, then he skillfully changed his address. "Uncle, you're sitting in the wrong place, my seat is in the front." He looked at Max, his eyes filled with joy. This is Max's first time attending his son's parent-teacher meeting, and it's also the first time he has kept his promise. But this excitement didn't last long. The next moment, Max avoided his gaze. "I didn't sit in the wrong place, this is my seat." The son was taken aback for a moment, just about to speak, when he was pushed aside by a figure. "Get away, this is my goo dad." Out of maternal instinct, I immediately held my son close. Max also instinctively stood up, but froze again when he met Sally's surprised gaze. He withdrew his hand, shielding the boy behind him, and said stiffly, "Eric didn't mean it, I apologize on his behalf." My son and I were both stunned. Such protection, such care, my son had never experienced before. "Who is he?" I stood up and asked softly. Max paused for a moment, and after meeting my gaze, a hint of guilt flashed in his eyes. "A friend's child." "Really?" I murmured, but deep down I understood. This was the child in Sally's photo, the child that Max was willing to accompany. Sure enough, the next moment, Sally walked in with water and was quite surprised to see us. "Julia? Are you here to accompany the kids to the parent-teacher meeting too? Where is the children's father?" Hearing this, I instinctively looked at Max, but only saw his evasive gaze. I understood in my heart, he was afraid I would expose him. In a daze, I seemed to return to the day Sally went back to her country. The usually cold man got drunk for the first time. It was also the first time he smiled upon hearing his son call him dad. My son and I both thought that we were finally going to find happiness. But in the next moment, the name Max was uttering was Sally's. It was then that I realized he had mistaken someone for her. I unconsciously tightened my grip on my son's hand. Just as I was about to speak, my son spoke first. "My dad is not in the country, he's very busy, I don't want to disturb him." One sentence brought shock to two people. I lowered my head in disbelief, but all I saw was my son's slightly red eyes. He looked at Max, trying hard to raise a knowing smile. "Uncle Goo, my mom and I are leaving first." At this moment, all the sadness was lodged in my chest. At the moment I turned around, Max suddenly grabbed me. "What did Daniel just say?" Max looked at his son in shock, as if trying to confirm something. Is it because the child who could never be driven away in the past has now learned to avoid suspicion on their own? I tugged at the corner of my mouth, feeling particularly ironic. "I didn't say anything, Max, the parent-teacher meeting is about to start." I pulled his hand away and took my son to sit in the front. Until the moment I sat down, I could still feel the scorching gaze behind me. But no matter how intense it was, it couldn't warm my heart. The parent-teacher meeting began as scheduled. I held my son, hoping for the first time that the teacher's voice could be a bit stricter, to block out the warm conversation of the family of three behind me. The son was also mentioned by the teacher as expected, announcing that he had become the class monitor for this semester and asking him to come up and speak. But the son refused. He was unwilling to go on stage and also unwilling to speak. I knew that he didn't want to see the scene of Max sitting together with that child. He didn't want to admit that his dad would rather attend a parent-teacher meeting with someone else's child than let him openly call him dad. After finishing, I took my son to the teacher's office to complete the withdrawal procedures. As we walked out of the school gate, we happened to run into Max, who was waiting for someone. He stood by the roadside, as if he had been waiting for a long time, holding a bunch of cotton candy in his hand. "Why did it take so long?" "Let's go home together," Max said, handing the cotton candy to his son. Going home together. Once, this was the state my son and I looked forward to the most. Now, it just sounds ironic. The son reached out his hand and took the cotton candy from Max, and the gloomy face that had been frowning all night finally broke into a smile. Looking at my son's expectant gaze, my heart softened, and just as I was about to agree, I heard him say, "Sally's child is a transfer student and didn't participate in the previous class committee competition. Otherwise, let your son tell the homeroom teacher that he won't be class president this time. Give the opportunity to Eric." A light, airy sentence made both my son and me feel cold inside. Indeed, all the gifts had their prices marked in secret. Just like this string of cotton candy, it too comes at a cost. "Okay, Uncle Goo." It was the voice of the son. He had red eyes as he put the cotton candy into his mouth. Max's eyes softened slightly. Just as he was about to take his son's hand, the phone rang. It was Sally. "Max, Eric isn't feeling well. Can you come see us now?" Max's expression changed instantly, and he turned to get into the car. At the moment he closed the door, his son suddenly shouted loudly, "Dad." Max paused as he closed the door, peering out to meet his son's slightly reddened eyes. After a long silence, he said, "Be careful." This time, he didn't make his son change his words. However, this was the last time his son would call him dad. That night, my son and I packed our bags and booked our tickets to go abroad. We didn't mention Max again, and there would no longer be a light in the living room waiting for him to return all night long. The next morning, my son and I went out with our luggage, checked in, and boarded the plane. Before turning off my phone, I sent Max one last message, "Wishing you happiness." The next second, the chat box that had been silent for a long time vibrated wildly. My finger lingered on the power button, not yet pressing down. Daniel noticed my hesitation, glanced at the screen, and his eyes instantly turned red. He tugged at my sleeve, lowered his head, and reminded me in a muffled voice, "Mom, we should go." I gently rubbed his hair, feeling a pang of heartache at how suddenly he had grown up. In the company, Max watched the shutdown prompt sound on the screen, his brows furrowing tighter and tighter. Yesterday he hurried over, only to find that Eric was just hungry and clamoring for KFC. He thought of Daniel, whom he had left behind, and a twinge of guilt arose in his heart. Eric enjoyed that meal very much. Today, if he takes Daniel to KFC, he should be very happy too. Max? Sally's voice interrupted his thoughts. Max looked at Sally, who was wearing a low-cut, form-fitting dress, and gently frowned. Julia has a great body proportion, yet she always wraps herself up tightly and never dresses like this. Sally noticed Max's dazed expression and thought he was captivated by her beauty. She leaned in closer and said, "The client has arrived, and the shareholders are here too. This time I'll accompany you." The strong scent of roses wafted from her, and Max suddenly sneezed several times. After I learned that Max was allergic to perfume, I gave away all my perfumes and even changed my shampoo to a light tea scent. Yet Sally, as his former fiancée who had been in love with him for many years, completely forgot. Max silently distanced himself from her, then stood up and walked towards the conference room. Last time he promised to let Sally return to work, and this time he could take the opportunity to have her officially appear in front of everyone. I also want to take this opportunity to tell everyone that Sally is under Max's protection. Sally saw Max's tacit approval and followed him in her high heels. In the conference room, everyone was enthusiastically discussing the hot secretary they had seen in the president's office today, but fell silent when Max walked in. Max seemed oblivious, flipping through the documents on the table. After just a glance, his brow furrowed. Everyone else looked at the documents in their hands, their expressions varying. All the documents have traces of watercolor pen scribbles, with the crooked word "agree" that clearly looks like a child's handwriting. Max threw the document on the table, his tone somewhat harsh. "Who prepared this document? Do you have no basic work skills?" The department heads present exchanged glances. All the documents were copied to the president's office by them and printed out by the secretary. Even if something went wrong, it couldn't be blamed on them. Max looked around at everyone with a face as cold as frost and finally coldly threw out a sentence, "Bring Julia here." The HR director hesitated and said, "Max, Julia." Before he could finish speaking, the client interrupted him, slamming the document on the table. "Max, if this is your company's attitude, then we have no need to cooperate." Everyone's gaze fell on the document, where the name of the leader from Party A was defaced with a crooked drawing of a big turtle, along with a few insulting words written beside it. Max's face turned ashen. He had never imagined that the mother and son he trusted would cause him such a huge mess. Sally, feeling wronged, explained with tears in her eyes, "I'm sorry, I didn't think." Party A retorted without any courtesy, "What do you think you are?" "I'm talking to you, Max." Max rubbed his aching forehead and stood up to apologize, "I'm sorry, this matter was my oversight. I will arrange for someone to prepare a new contract immediately. As an apology, we are willing to lower the price by another 3% this time." Party A remained silent, calculating the value of their own face. Sally cried out in grievance, her appearance like a pear blossom drenched in rain, causing everyone to frown, no longer showing any trace of kindness. In the workplace, appearance can only be considered a bonus. What this group of people values most is workability. Like the Julia of the past, not only was her appearance pleasing to the eye, but her workability was also 100 times stronger than hers. I really don't understand what Max is thinking. He'd rather not have Julia than keep this vase by his side. After everyone left, Sally looked at him with red eyes. "Max, I'm sorry, I didn't expect this to happen. What should I do?" Max instinctively wanted to comfort her, but he froze when he met Sally's pitiful gaze. Julia would never look at him with such eyes. She is proud. She strives for perfection in all her work. No matter how difficult the task or how tricky the situation, she can handle it with ease. Instead of being like Sally, who can only cry and leaves all the mess for herself to figure out. If today were Julia, no, it wouldn't be. She is very careful, and Daniel is very well behaved. He would never. Thinking of this, Max's pained gaze gradually cooled down. When he looked at Sally again, he had already regained his composure. "You can go out first, and don't get involved in the matters that follow." Sally hesitated, seemingly taken aback by Max's distant attitude. "Max. Go out." Max lost his patience, and his tone grew cold. Sally bit her lip and, in the end, unwillingly walked out. Max slumped helplessly in the chair, a multitude of images flashing through his mind. 7 years ago, I stood out among a group of excellent job seekers and was specifically chosen by Max to be his assistant. At that time, I was just a newcomer with no work experience, no identity, no background, and my appearance was nothing special. I couldn't even understand the most basic professional terms used in the contract. At that time, many people said I was a woman who relied on her body to rise in the company. In order to truly stand by his side, I could only work desperately hard. At work, I endured disdain while seeking advice from my senior. I always carry a notebook with me, recording all matters and his every preference. After work, I self-study French, German, and even Esperanto. I strive to be his timely rein. Even at a business cocktail party, I can quickly report everyone's preferences. I can effortlessly help him navigate tricky clients. No matter when, as long as he needs me, I will be by his side. Gradually, I became someone he couldn't live without. I also became his constant companion in work and life. Everyone envies Max for having a top-notch secretary like Julia, and he himself is very pleased to have such a capable assistant by his side. Unfortunately, everything was ruined that night. I went from being the golden secretary in his heart to the scheming woman who desperately climbed into his bed in his words. My efforts became a means to get close to him in his eyes. He used to admire me so much, and now he loathes me just as much, to the point that even our child receives not a bit of his concern. He thought that if the person by his side were Sally, his life would definitely not be like this. Now he got his wish, but thinking about what happened today, he felt a bit regretful. Thinking of today's gaudy Sally, so far removed from the first love he yearned for but could not have. He suddenly felt that his feelings for her had perhaps changed long ago. Perhaps he no longer loved Sally as much, perhaps he loved. He rubbed his forehead, trying to dispel this absurd thought. Yet, Daniel's image unconsciously came to mind. He may not love me, but the child is innocent. Thinking of this, Max took out his phone and quickly typed a message. "Get ready, I'll pick you up tonight." Maybe sensing the stiffness in his tone, he frowned and adjusted his words. "Let's take Daniel to KFC for dinner." He looked at it 2 more times, then took a deep breath and pressed send. One afternoon, the text messages sank like stones into the sea, with no replies received. Max picked up his phone again and again, only to put it down in disappointment each time. Sally brought the coffee to the table and whispered, "Max." Max stared at the blank screen, his eyelids not lifting even once, his tone carrying a restlessness he wasn't even aware of. "Just put it down and go out. Also, from now on, call me Max at the company. Even if you were arranged by me, you need to be mindful of avoiding suspicion." Sally's eyes glistened with tears, hovering on the brink of falling, looking utterly pitiful. Max looked up, slightly furrowing his brow, and picked up the internal phone, saying, "Sally is still getting used to her first day. You should arrange for her to rotate through the department first, and she can come back after the assessment period." When Sally was taken away, she still had that pitiful look, but it no longer moved Max in the slightest. As the end of the workday approached, Max still hadn't received any reply from me. But this time he was surprisingly patient. Perhaps recalling how he was often left behind every time they went out, he rarely took the initiative to go to KFC, waiting in line for half an hour to pack all the food into one order. As long as Daniel ate, he would remember the flavors he liked. When he excitedly opened the front door, the large living room was empty, with no Daniel sitting on the carpet building blocks, and no me in the kitchen preparing dinner. Max went to the kitchen. He took a can of cola from the fridge and only noticed when closing the door that the fridge door was covered with stickers of all sizes, most of which were family photos. Max's heart was pierced for a moment because there was no dad in Daniel's painting. It seemed that the scene of Daniel first asking to paint him had appeared again before my eyes. He held the sketchpad and cautiously approached Max, saying, "Dad, can you be my model?" And what did he say at that time? He kept a straight face, not even looking up from his phone as he replied to Eric's message perfunctorily, "I'm very busy, I don't have time." Thinking of this, an inexplicable restlessness and regret suddenly surged in Max's heart. It's okay, when Daniel invites him next time, he will just accept. Max arranged the food on the table one by one, then looked at the phone on the table. It has been 10 minutes since Daniel's kindergarten let out, and according to the route home, Daniel and I will be home in 5 minutes. He nervously arranged the fries and carefully squeezed the ketchup into the shape of a heart on the white plate. After finishing everything, he sat at the table, nervously staring at the direction of the door. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes passed. The door and the phone remained silent, and Max's heart felt as if it were being torn apart by an invisible hand, making him anxious and uneasy. Finally, half an hour later, a gentle knock came at the door. Max walked happily towards the door. "Daniel, guess what Dad has prepared for you today?" The word surprise had not yet left her lips, but the smile had already frozen on her face. "What are you doing here?" At the door, Sally stood anxiously holding Eric's hand, and upon hearing Max's unfriendly tone, she said reluctantly, "Eric knows he has caused a big mess and insists on coming to apologize to you in person. I also have some work-related matters I want to ask Julia about. After all, she used to." Max looked at the mother and child, clearly having cried, and not wanting to face the scrutinizing gazes of the neighbors, he had no choice but to slightly turn to the side and welcome them in. Eric spotted the KFC on the table at a glance and was about to reach for it when he was startled by Sally's piercing gaze. Lowering my head, I said with a sense of grievance, "Dad Goo, I was wrong. I shouldn't have scribbled on your documents." Seeing Eric's aggrieved expression, Max's heart softened for a moment. Daniel often looked at him with those same eyes. Thinking of his son, he felt a bit flustered again. It's been so long, why haven't Julia and Daniel come home yet? He ignored the mother and son, simply picked up his phone, walked into the kitchen, and started dialing my number, but it was off again. He pressed his lips tightly together, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed the company's phone number, preparing to inquire about my absence from work today. But he heard a loud noise coming from the living room. When Max came out, he saw Eric standing on the remaining Lego base, tiny blocks scattered all over the floor, the entire living room in a chaotic mess. Sally shouted sharply, startling Eric, who dropped the half-eaten egg tart on the ground and ran to Max, crying. In the past, whenever he made a mistake and his mother wanted to scold him, Max would protect him like his father did, and he thought it would be the same this time. Sally watched his actions without intervening, a glimmer of brilliance flashing in her eyes. But this time, they all miscalculated. Max took out his phone, took a few photos, and casually sent them to the lawyer, then coldly issued an ultimatum. "The value loss and subsequent compensation caused today will be discussed by my lawyer with you. Now, please leave my home." Sally, feeling wronged, added a hint of disbelief, "Max, it's just a toy. Can we have Eric apologize to Daniel?" Max looked at the fragments in front of him, his voice very soft, yet it made Sally shiver involuntarily. "This is the championship prize from Daniel's Lego competition, the only one in the world. Do you think a mere apology can solve the problem?" Sally was left speechless, but Eric was unwilling to accept it. "I won't apologize. Why should I apologize to the child of a mistress?" Max stared wide-eyed in surprise. "What did you say?" Sally wanted to cover Eric's mouth, but it was too late. Eric stood in front of Max with his hands on his hips, looking fierce. "Daniel's mother is the mistress, and Daniel is the child of the mistress. If it weren't for his mother shamelessly seducing you back then, you should have been my father." Max's voice was cold enough to freeze. "Who told you that?" Eric shrank back a little, secretly glancing at Sally, and still shouted loudly, "After the last parent-teacher meeting, the kindergarten kids all said this. Only the third grader's child is not recognized. His house, his dad, should have belonged to me and Mom." Max's face was so dark it seemed like water could drip from it. He recalled the parent-teacher meeting when Daniel had excitedly called him dad, only to be sternly reprimanded and told to change his words. He had never considered how much harm such behavior could cause him. But now, hearing these words come from a group of children, the impact must be immense. No wonder my face looked so terrible at that time, no wonder Daniel's gaze turned to disappointment. What has he done? The frustration in his chest erupted in an instant, and Max, with red eyes, dragged Eric by the collar to the door, then threw him onto the ground. Sally rushed out in pain, helping Eric up, tearfully accusing him, "Max, you take your anger out on me, the child is innocent." "Max, countless times in my mind, I pleaded with him, Max, you can misunderstand me all you want, but the child is innocent. Can you show him a little fatherly love?" He remembered that proud woman again. She did not soften in response to his misunderstandings, nor did she soften when he neglected her. The only thing that made her soften was the child. Max angrily called security to have the person removed, then began frantically calling the company. "Hello?" The voice on the other end of the phone was very noisy. Through the receiver, he heard the HR director gently soothing the child, "Daddy has work to do, but I'll come play with you and build blocks in a little while, okay?" On the other end of the phone, a child's soft and sweet voice said, "Daddy, hurry up, or soon your room will be taken over by a big monster." The HR director smiled and replied, then walked to a quiet place and asked with some confusion, "Max? What's wrong?" The deep voice of the man startled Max, who was somewhat lost in thought. The man cleared his throat awkwardly and asked, "What is the reason for Julia's absence today?" The HR director was taken aback for a moment, then quickly replied, "Julia has already resigned." "What?" Max exclaimed, losing his composure, his hand tightly clenched into a fist. The HR director quickly explained, "Early the day before yesterday, Julia submitted her resignation letter. She said her husband works abroad, and she wants to take her son to reunite with family and will not come back afterwards." Max gritted his teeth and questioned, "Such a big deal, why didn't you tell me?" The HR director paused for a moment. "Max, you said that Julia would only be an ordinary assistant from now on, and that all processes would follow company regulations, so her resignation procedures do not require your senior approval. I saw that Julia was very determined, so I followed the process and handled her resignation. Is there a problem?" Max listened, his hand tightening into a fist, almost unable to suppress a scoff. How could he not know when Julia had gotten a husband abroad? Just as I was about to lose my temper, a child's voice suddenly came from the phone. "Daddy, why aren't you here yet?" The comforting voice of the HR director sounded, almost done, baby. Can you wait until Daddy finishes the call?" It is probably an innate ability of every adult, as soon as they face a child, their voice immediately becomes gentle. Max listened blankly to the voice on the phone, uncontrollably thinking of Daniel again. Actually, he also had a complete family. It's just that it seems he lost it. He walked numbly into the guest room, a place he had not set foot in for 7 years. Everything was just as it had been before I appeared, except for the divorce agreement that lay on the table. He flipped through the terms above, clearly articulating my demands. The usually cold man instantly reddened his eyes. He never expected that the greedy woman in his heart would say, "Just Daniel, I don't want this home anymore, and I don't want you anymore." Max didn't go to the company, instead, he waited early at the kindergarten gate. He was waiting for me to smile as I brought Daniel to school. Unfortunately, from morning till night, he waited all day but did not see a trace of me and Daniel. After school, Eric ran out and immediately saw Max's Rolls-Royce. Just as he was about to get into the car, under the envious gazes of the kindergarten children like before, he was suddenly pulled down by Max. "Where's Daniel? Did you see him today?" Eric looked at Max with dissatisfaction and replied disdainfully, "No. Maybe he knows he's the child of a mistress and is too afraid to come to school." As soon as Sally arrived, she saw a large and a small figure facing off, and her unease grew stronger. As soon as she got home yesterday, she received 2 documents, one was a termination notice, and the other was a lawyer's letter. She originally thought she had successfully won back Max's heart, but little did she know that it had long been occupied by me and Daniel. He just wasn't willing to admit it. Upon learning his identity, the dean's attitude shifted from surprise to disdain, and his words became unkind. In all these years, it's the first time I've seen someone so eager to be a father to someone else's child. Every time there was a parent-teacher meeting, the other kids would mock him for not having a dad, and I really thought his father had passed away. Daniel's mother has already processed his withdrawal, and apart from these certificates he didn't take, I have no more information about him. Max stood at the entrance of the kindergarten, holding a thick stack of certificates, tears streaming down his face. He finally realized that he had not only lost his capable wife but also completely lost his excellent son. Goodbye Max, it was at Daniel's art exhibition. Over the past few years abroad, I have intentionally nurtured his interest in painting according to Daniel's preferences. Although he is still young, he has already become a well-known young painter in the circle. This time, invited to bring his paintings back to his home country for a charity auction, all the money earned will be donated to the welfare institution according to his wishes. As soon as the auction began, all of Daniel's paintings were bought at a high price by one person. I had a faint premonition in my heart. Sure enough, during the part where the painter thanked the buyer, we saw Max. He has aged a lot compared to before, his clothes are covered in wrinkles, and his chin is also thick with stubble. Yet despite this, he is still very handsome. He stared at us blankly, taking the flowers that Daniel handed over with a sense of helplessness. In the embrace, I heard him whisper softly, "I'm sorry, Daniel, Daddy lost you. Please give Daddy another chance, okay?" Daniel's figure stiffened for a moment, quickly distancing himself from him, and politely smiled, "Thank you for your donation, Uncle. I also hope you will continue to support public welfare in the future and help more children find their fathers and mothers." Max looked at Daniel in front of him, his eyes red again. But what use is later deriving affection? Max's hurt will be a scar in Daniel's heart for a lifetime. Even if Daniel can forgive, I will not easily forgive him. After the charity sale ended, Max followed us to our home abroad. When the doorbell rang and I saw Max's guilty and awkward gaze, I was not surprised. He stood at the door, looking at me seriously. "I didn't agree to the divorce, it was my fault before, and I have reflected on it many times over the past few years. I want to have my home back, could you give me a formal chance to pursue you?" I rarely fell silent, but in the end, I let him into the house. I know that Daniel sometimes still cries for his dad, but as he grows up, he hides his feelings. He is afraid of making me sad and never brings him up again. A month later, Max knocked on my door again. "I have transferred all my business abroad, and from now on I will definitely work hard to be a good dad." My son and I exchanged a smile. I believe he will.